over the last couple of days, I'm talking about today and yesterday, we've been having a lot of conversation about debt justice, reparative justice, and thinking about how we all need to collaborate extensively in this conversation, in this dialogue, and in the kind of advocacy we seek to pursue. Beyond that, we've been thinking about different elements that are coming up all the way from narrative building around reparations. We're thinking a lot about which kind of stakeholders should be part of this conversation. And we've also been thinking a lot about the context of what's been happening. And we can see that Africa is at a crossroads, considering the dynamic that we're facing, all the way from a debt crisis, tax justice issues, climate crisis issues. And interesting enough is that the Youth for Tax Justice Network has been amplifying young people in dialogues around economic justice. And this work has been seen extensively in dialogue around the financing for development, of which the conference took place June, July. We can see the UN Tax Convention negotiation process as well that has been inviting different stakeholders, and YTJN has been at the center of this particular dialogues and saying that young people have to also participate in this process. Even as we think about the climate change discourse in terms of COP30 and several other elements, we've been saying extensively that young people are important in this conversation, which means that they create a bridge between any kind of discourse that we have with parliamentarians, with different civil society organizations that exist, and with different groups. Now, this afternoon, I'm joined by 4 very great panelists. And the style of our session is going to begin with a keynote address, and then it's going to move into a quick respondent session, and we're going to open plenary. Now, the respondent session will have one general question that is going to be directed to the panelists, and then the second one will come from each one of you, so we will set it together. Now, I'll begin with the names of my panelists. First, I have Mr. Shem Joshua Otieno, who is a knowledge management advisor at the GIZ African Union. Shem, please wave at the people in the room. Second, I have Martha Bekele, who is the co-founder of Dev Transform. Martha, happy to have you here. We have Mr. Byron Ochola, who is a research officer at the Institute for Social Accountability. Byron, wave. You can wave at the people in the room, so they can feel that you're here. Then we have Mr. Anthony Buloma, who is the CEO of the Kenya Young Parliamentarians Association. Yeah, this one you're used to doing the wave. And then lastly, we have Mr. John Kafuko, who is the programs manager for the Youth for Tax Justice Network. So at the end of this session, there's something very interesting that we're going to launch, which is, I'm not going to tell you, but I'm going to tell you as we transition into that particular segment. And I hope that you're all going to collaborate with us in this entire process. Now, I just want to begin with Shem, who I want to invite to the stage to really just give us the keynote address. Why is because 2025 has been centered as the year for reparative justice. And in this conversation is that youth are one of the most important stakeholders. But at the same time, the African Union is very central for this conversation because it drives it as at a continental level. So Shem, please tell us how we can own up to this conversation, how we can be part of this conversation, and just give us some kind of context to this dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam MC of the day. Good afternoon, everyone. I just want to start over by confirming that the session we're having today is very relevant to the discussion of the youth of today. And it's coming at the right time when you look at the event or the conference that's taking place with regard to reparations. And this is also in line to the African Union theme of the year of 2025 that talks about justice for Africa and people of African descent through reparation. And this compels us to connect our economic challenges, not only to policy choices, but to the history, to power, and to justice. When you look at the discussion that took place yesterday, you'll realize Dr. Patrick Kolomo talked about without power, you can't achieve anything, right? And that's the reality. We might not agree with it in totality, but it's the reality. He even gave an example of some of the wonderful countries, Rwanda, China, and you can see that they didn't cry for long, but they rebuilt their countries. Now, this conversation is not just rhetorical. It is a structural imperative when it comes to reparations. And it is time that we need to stop managing the crisis and start transforming the system. And when we talk about transforming the system, then that is where the voice of the youths are required. Allow me to give a brief summary of why this discussion is important to us as youths today. We have seen in most of the Africa countries where most of the youths are complaining, bringing out solutions, but somehow few people consider those solutions to be solutions, but they think youth's voices are crisis in nature, right? Now, Africa external debt, by 2024 surpassed $1 trillion. And when we talk about our debt surpassing $1 trillion, it's not just a figure written somewhere, but it is impactful to us when it comes to how is it affecting our basic provisions. Now, we are also paying more than 85 billion US dollars on debt service alone. This has been spoken about, I'm just repeating. And this sum is clearly more than much of what most of the Africa countries are spending on healthcare and education, which are the basic fundamental requirements for the youth to grow in terms of their human capital. You know very well that no economy can grow if youths are not given tools. When we talk about our education not being financed, then it means that the rate of illiteracy is growing, right? And you know what happens when you talk about the rate of illiteracy growing much higher, then it means that people might not be innovative enough. And with that reason, you can see that even the per capita income of the people will go down. Now, we have also to understand some of the issues. I just want to give an example with some of the Africa countries. For centuries, Africa vast natural wealth. I'm very happy that Martha, who is a very great champion for the climate financing and also issues to do with natural resource for Africa is with us as a panel today. But you can understand very well that Africa is blessed with a lot of natural resources. And when we talk about our natural resources, the question that we need to ask ourselves is, do we own them? What is happening with their management? Now, let me just give just two examples. The Democratic Republic of Congo is producing more than 70% of the world cobalt, yet millions of Congolese still live in poverty, including youths. While the foreign corporates get profit out of it. Nigeria oil wealth are largely enriched with multinational companies. And local communities in the Niger Delta Force are facing environmental problems and poverty increment. You can see how there is a diverging scenario in all that we are trying to bring out. Now, another problem that we are facing is on the illicit financial flow. We have talked about this before. We generally link illicit financial flow with the resource extractions and tax evasion, which is currently estimated to be more than 80 billion US dollars annually leaving Africa and this is being drained out of our continent. But the question we need to ask ourselves as youths of today, where is this money going to? Most of it doesn't remain in Africa countries, right? It goes to developed economies. And those are the questions we need to ask ourselves when we talk about the illicit financial flow. That money alone is enough to finance much of our basic needs. So these resources generally are extracted under the colonial treaties long time ago, but Africans generally are denied sovereignty to rule over these natural resources because that is where our wealth lies. Now, when we talk about debt justice and resource sovereignty, I just want to talk about 3 economic reconstruction and structural corrections that probably we might look over because we are looking at the solutions that youth need to bring on table when it comes to the theme of the year for the Africa Union. When we talk about resource sovereignty, there's need for us as youths and as the continent to ensure that Africa economies or nations regain control over their natural resources. And this should be done through transparency, contracts, and regulatory frameworks which will allow us to own these resources. We're talking about fair trade and investment policies. And this generally, if put in place, will help to curb the capital flight and promote local value addition for our natural resources. Another thing is the international cooperation and tackling of illicit financial flow. And some of you might be aware about the UN Tax Convention and how important it is to the Africa continent, the gains that we can get out of it. And these are the platforms that we need, or we youths should make sure our voices are there. Because when it goes through, there is significant amount of money or capital that will help Africa to grow. I've moved from a stage of talking about why, but I'm in the stage of talking about what do we need to do as youth. Now, why should youth lead on this conversation? Currently, we know that 60% of our population in Africa is generally under 25. And we are not the future, actually. We are the now. I don't always believe in the narrative of youths are the leaders of tomorrow. We are leaders of today. Because if you don't solve today, you won't see tomorrow, right? So no need of us being told you are the leaders of tomorrow, because today is what we have. So what do we bring on table? We need to have the moral agency and reject the normalization of exploitation. Let me give you an example. You'll realize some of our Africa countries, when someone is corrupt, taken to court, when court still give them time to go home, their popularity increases, right? And then they go to politics, and it is us youths who will elect them to the offices. But in less than 2-3 years, we start to cry like, oh, they're not the right people we want. But it is our voices that are taking them there. Another thing that we can take into consideration is the global solidarity. We need to connect youth movement across the diaspora, worldwide, and Africa as a whole to talk about issues that are very fundamental to our economic growth. Today we are talking about the reparation. But have you asked yourself, what do we need to do to understand the quantification of what is owed to us? Just recently, there was a court ruling. That is the International Court of Justice. Martha, you might be aware of that, right? On the climate damage. And the court confirmed that the dignity of humanity is important in the global, in the whole global. And so these are issues that Africa countries, civil societies can take into consideration when we talk about climate. You pay for the climate damage. Then you'll realize that we already have a line of what do we need to consider when it comes to what are the precedents that have been put in place by the court. And now, in countries like South Africa, there is a tag that is ongoing. Maybe some of South Africans are fee must fall, link education to debt and broader inequality. You know when that happened and there was eruption with regard to how youths came out. Look at countries like Kenya, Nigeria. There are platforms, for example, the budget, IT, which make public spending visible and people can easily see how the government is trying to spend their money. And these are platforms that youths can take and use. Almost finalizing on it, but the question now is how youth can co-architect on debt-free future. One way is through research and accountability. Maybe I can say I've been blessed to sit with people from global north, and sometimes they bring their best in the discussions. I know Africa bring their best, always. But when you don't have the scientific proof of how you want the discussion to go, sometimes it is impossible even to make the discussion move from point A to point B. So I believe that youths have opportunity to come up and lead the national debt resource audit investigation on the origin and legitimacy of the debts and how the resources are being used. This can be used, we can do this by building open data platforms. For example, I know in my country, Kenya, tracking of debt repayments, we have talked about that. We're talking about resource revenues. We talk about public spending. These are platforms that youths have to make sure that their voices are not just heard, but taken into consideration in the discussion. And then another thing is the advocacy and movement building. When you talk about advocacy and movement building, we talk about youth-led coalitions, which will allow us to demand for the cancellation of illegitimate debts and also allowing us to recoup some of our resources that are being taken illegitimate. Now, another thing that we can consider is that youths need to find their way on the seats when it comes to debt restructuring processes. Sometimes you'll wake up and you just find your country is borrowing. You don't know the terms and conditions, not because they don't want to tell you, but because you don't take time to understand the terms and conditions of the debts. The role of African Union in reparations is very important as per now because it's the theme of the year. And there are different offices, including the youth offices, that gives us opportunity to air some of these issues. The inclusion in the national budget hearing and policy design. I know different organizations, TISA, IBP, Budgety, it's called Budgety now, IPF. I'm talking about the Kenya ones. I know CTPD in Zambia, I know the youth. They always get time because some of them I've worked with, and I can see how they bring out the issues to parliament committees. But the most important thing is to make sure that we don't just bring the issues, but we make sure that they're taken into consideration. Now, finally, as I conclude, we have to note that we do not want to inherit debt and be silent. But young Africa, we have the opportunity to break this barrier. We must co-design justice. We must co-enforce accountability. we must co-architect a future that is debt-free, resource sovereign, dignity-filled, and finally, those which are development-driven. We today, are the generation of repair, and we have to make sure that we don't pass these problems to our future generation. And I believe that the discussion that we are going to have today are going to give us opportunity to discuss on how we have gotten ourselves into platforms that allow us not to complain, but to provide solutions. And I think that is where we are going to. Thank you so much.
I didn't know I was this short until I had to stand on this podium. But Shem, thank you very much for that contextualization of where we really need to be and the kind of conversation we need to have, and to really just think about critical elements. I think the biggest thing I'd want to highlight is that 60% of our population is actually under 25, which means that automatically they become inheritors of any kind of governance decision that takes place within our respective jurisdictions. And by that simple fact, it simply means that this population has to be part of the dialogue that we're having, has to be part of the advocacy strategies we're trying to curate and trying to put together. Now, even interestingly, and I really want to borrow from Honorable Vuyo's speech yesterday, who we really spotlight as the voice of the young people in our discourse, is that it merges a lot to what Shem is talking about in terms of the various areas that we need to actually focus on in this conversation. And that's all the way from thinking about the idea of research and accountability, the idea of advocacy and movement building, the idea of youths finding their way to the seats, and even just thinking about how to make sure that there's no intergenerational inequity in this discourse. So as Shem was talking, he also talked a lot about the ICJ case specifically on climate change that has been on the spotlight for a while. And if you notice from the conversation we've been having as well, there's been a lot of discourse on climate justice, climate change. You center it as you may. But now there's something interesting we want to ask. How then can young populations co-create conversations around climate justice? And with this, I just want to invite Martha, I don't know if there's a mic where you are, to really just tell us. And in your discourse, I really want you to tell us about the work that you do, because you've been training young people a lot in conversations around climate justice and what it looks like, and how they can be part of this conversation, and how do we create that interlinkage. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Lorit. Yes, I think, the discussions so far have been, when you're talking about climate financing, climate change, and the injustice that you see there, it is not isolated. It is within the context of the global order. It is within the context of the global financial architecture. Because the mess and the injustice that you see in the bigger picture is perfectly reflected in the subset, which is climate crisis, climate financing crisis. So I wanted to start from that. So this mess in the as you said, I'm fortunate to have contacts with more than 300 young people around Africa to train them on climate financing and what do we mean by climate financing. And the quest for justice is, number one, we need to know how messy it is out there. As we speak now, there is no common agreed definition of climate finance. The Africa Group of Negotiators and developing countries have been pushing for a common definition of climate finance. Guess who have been against that? The global north. Because they are saying that it will limit their effort. But we're asking, really? Is that the reason? Because from practice, there are investigations that have been done, and some of you must have heard me like a broken record saying this. There are investigations that have shown that even a love story, a film that was made in the rainforest of Argentina, was recorded as climate finance. Gelato factory, chocolate factory. What they spent global north in developing countries are being recorded as climate financing. Climate financing, we have this thing called the Rio marker, where we try to separate what is finance and what is not climate finance, but still we do not have objective indicators, meaning that they are based on the feelings of the one who is king in the information, who has given how much. So, I mean, I've spoken about the absence of agreed upon definition, inconsistency in reporting. We don't even know if there is clear impact of climate projects. There is this huge World Bank road project that is being reported, for instance, as climate. But it may even contribute to more emissions. So we don't understand and we do not know the impacts of these climate projects. There is misreporting over, there is an investigation that was done over US $1 in every $5 of climate finance commitments was spent on things that have little to do with climate. The other thing is, there is this concept that I want young people to understand. It's called new and additionality. What is being committed for climate, for instance, when we were in COP27, if I'm not mistaken, 27 or 28, so the German government was committing money to climate. And even the German negotiators were asking, like, where is this money coming from? They know it's not in the Ministry of Finance. So basically what is happening is it's being repurposed. What they committed for development, they are now saying this is going to be climate. So what we need to see is there new and additionality of those resources. The other unfair thing that we've seen, and of course it has been discussed in the previous sessions, was the unfavorable practice and attitude towards our credit worthiness. They look at you, they dismiss you, you know, high risk. But is that the case? In fact, we pay back. We pay back what we borrow. However, the interest rate that we are attracting is so high because of the attitude that they have, the misguided attitude. I'll give you an example. There is a study that showed that loans to enable solar farms in Europe attract 4% interest rate against the 10% for African solar farms. The other thing is I want to relate now this climate issue with the loans. I have said this before in other sessions, I will repeat it. When I was looking at the 2022 figures from OECD countries, African least developed countries are made to access finance in the form of loans. Whether you call that concessional loans or non-concessional, you have to pay back. So it's adding on your debt. However, the government of Kenya, for instance, in 2020 had declared that whatever comes in the form of loan should be considered as its own contribution and not the contribution of, say, the German government or the UK government. This has been amplified by Gabon on behalf of the Africa group of negotiators. This is not new. Where we are now here in Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah had already said that when this assistance or charities come in the form of concessional loans, these are just revolving funds that will go back. I mean, we were told in the 1960s. It's just that what is being said by new faces. But these are old stories. We've been saying them forever. What else? So, I mean, as young people, what do you need to push for when it comes to climate financing? Number one, you need to start and unequivocally be unapologetic that there is historical responsibility. And there is a concept called common but differentiated responsibilities. Historical injustices. This cannot be whitewashed. They had happened. For the mess that we are now, you can relate it to slavery, you can relate it to colonialism, neo-colonialism, the continued plundering of our resources. What is happening in DRC? That country cannot have peace because of those resources, the plundering of these resources. We need to be convicted and unapologetic about citing historical responsibilities, and the funding must come from those people. That being said, we need to also acknowledge that there is disproportionate effect on Africa. The scientific group, IPCC, had already established that the greatest impact is on Africa. This is undisputed. Debt servicing, as I said, they are coming in the form of loans, so debt servicing is crowding out essential services. I will be able to share this next month. I'm looking at how much 10 African countries are spending directly on climate and comparing that to specific programs in education, in health, social protection, as well as road projects. And I'm trying to look at, had that money been used for social services, you know, what could it have covered? Say, for instance, 74% of Kenya's government's primary education program. So this relates to what Shem was telling us, like, can we also be strong in producing evidence, data and evidence, so that we can continue highlighting the injustices? Why? Because when you produce those evidence, negotiators are going to have a tool when they are going to the negotiating table. So one of the things that we've done, for instance, is we are pushing for grants, no loans when it comes to climate finance. We need to push for the accessibility issues. Recognize that international financial institutions are not part of the solution. They are the cause of the problems. When the IMF and the World Bank, when they were established in 1944, they were established for the reconstruction of Europe. Remember that. And then in the 1980s, they took us to a mess where they told our governments, please keep off your hands from the economy, let the private sector come in, open your economy, we eat you again. That's exactly what happened. So recognizing that. Reparations. Someone said, what the climate crisis showed us is there is past injustices that cannot be addressed by adaptations and mitigations projects, rather only through reparations. These are historical harms that can never be reversed. And as young people, you need to be convicted and unequivocally call for reparations and relate climate injustice to reparations. The other thing I really want you to be very careful is when you are pushing for fossil fuel phase out. When Uganda discovered its oil, for instance, you know, the push not to explore what they have. Let's be very careful, because there are certain sectors that are called hard to abate. Okay, there is no technology that is available. So when you are pushing for a complete phase out of fossil projects or non-renewable energy sources, what you are trying to do is kicking the ladder away from our governments. So your advocacy message should be, your young people, I hope you are paying attention, phasing down for us and phasing out for the global north. Phasing down for us and phasing out for the global north. Shem had already said, for instance, I'm trying to give you advocacy messages. He said that what is going out of this continent is more than what is coming in. It's true. Be it illicit financial flows, and those tax dodging and profit shifting and so on. You compare that to the external financing that is coming in, the foreign direct investment, FDI, that is coming in, it is way above what is going out. So what are you going to push for? Push for net transfer of finances, net transfer to Africa. That's what we want to see. And that is part of reparations. Finally, of course, I see people talking about debt restructuring, debt relief. That is not a conversation in this conference, of course, because we are talking about debt cancellation. But what I want to see, young people, which maybe the Gen Alpha, I don't know, not maybe the Gen Z, but Gen Alpha, how about refusing to pay? Debt repudiation. That's what I want young people, my children, to say. Let my generation say debt relief. Let her generation say debt cancellation. Let the young people say debt repudiation. We don't pay. Sankara had already said, if we pay, we die. If we don't pay, they don't die. That's the energy, that is the fire we want to see. Let me finish by giving you a quote from Fanon. Franz Fanon. Each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. Thank you.
Nice. I think that's a very wonderful way to put that together. And I think I'm just going to echo that quote as I transition to the next speaker. Indeed, each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. And even as Martha speaks, we can see an element of climate finance 101 and reparations 101. I think we've had that whole masterclass in that conversation because it's really giving us some of the critical advocacy messages that we need to be very convicted upon. And even as the conversation keeps going on, you can see an interlink between what Shem began with all the way to what Martha is saying, is that data and evidence has to be part of this dialogue, has to be part of youth mobilization, has to be part of youth engagement, because that's the only way that we're able to fit into the room even better. And I think even with the conversation from Martha, I can see interesting people in the room who fit within that particular discourse, all the way from my good friend Mandla, who convenes the alternative mining Indaba, where such discourse also extends. Those are platforms to leverage. I can see Awake right there as well, that has been very central in this kind of discourse around climate finance and natural resource governance in general. Now, as we keep having the conversation, you'll notice interesting things that are coming out from each of the speakers. We've transitioned from setting the context, moving into what advocacy messages look like in critical sectors such as climate financing. And now we're going to move to a very interesting segment, and it's the idea of social accountability. And Viron, you've been at the center of civic participation, you've been at the center of awareness creation, and you've been at the center of trying to make sure that different populations, including youth, are part of social accountability processes. What does that look like in this conversation? And it would be great if you're also able to give us some lived experiences that a few young people and the different people who support young people in the room as well can relate with and take up as we have the conversation. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Lorit, and to our audience, thank you so much for creating time. I've been reflecting since we came, and yesterday I was having a discussion with my colleague, and we were arguing as to the setup of the conference, the confirmation, the conversation, and what next. And there's a gentleman who was passing, and when he heard us discussing what the conversation was all about yesterday, and he jokingly told us, "Did you guys attend philosophical classes?" Because philosophy is not supposed to give you answer. It's supposed to draw you back to start thinking, and you think deep. And so that after the event, you can then reflect, what did we discuss, and how do we get out of the problems that we are currently having. So to set the stage, my name is Byron Ochola. I work with the Institute for Social Accountability in Kenya. It is a civil society organization. And as the name suggests, social accountability, we work with people. So for us, every problem that we are trying to tackle, we look at it from the point of where are the people? Are the people at the center of the discussion? And this now takes me back to the discussion earlier of our session where we are arguing beyond reparations, what next? Beyond this room, how do we ensure that we bring everyone on board? Because we can't leave the discussion to AU alone. We can't leave the discussion to Afrodad alone. We can't leave the discussion to a few institutions alone. We have to bring people at the center of this discussion. And I will give example in terms of the Kenyan setup. When the IMF program was going on, we developed the paper under the Okochumi campaign where we had several partners with technical reports. And we were trying to tell the IMF the challenges that we are having. Yes, your program came to stabilize the economy. And one of the goal of the idea was to manage debt. But the debt, you are not managing debt, it keeps on increasing. And as it keeps on increasing, you come with conditionalities. And one of the conditionality is you have to show that you have the ability to pay. How do African countries show they have the ability to pay? It is through increasing taxes. You can't keep on increasing taxes in an economy that is already struggling. People will get fed up. So when we did all this, they couldn't listen to us. But now we retreated and went back to the people, and we told people, this is where we are, this is the problem. If you don't speak today, as you've been told you are leaders of tomorrow, there will be no tomorrow. You have to come out and get involved in the discussion that's happening. And that's how you see young people rising up. And it went beyond just the civic engagement of day-to-day physical meeting. Young people, now we are in the age of digital activism. People came out. There are those who used songs to communicate the message. There are those who use art to communicate the message. There are those who used poetry, music. And that's how people came out. So allow me to respond to your question in 4 areas. And usually when we talk about social accountability, we look at how do we get people to hold leaders accountable? How do we get people to participate in fiscal discourse? Because public finance is the main thing that I think affects every facet of our life, as long as you're a citizen of any country. Then what does this mean when it comes to reparations and reparative justice? Social accountability means then we have to shift the discussions from the places like this. Now we have to go to the grassroots level and get those people ask critical questions. For instance, the first question we can ask is, who is holding creditors and international financial institutions accountable for the injustices of unsustainable debt? The second question will be, who ensures that reparative measures, when you talk about debt cancellation, you talk about fair taxation, when you talk about climate finance or redistributive policies, who actually, how do we ensure that this will reach the communities that are most affected? Because now when you talk about reparation and reparative justice, it means we have to do historical analysis. Yes, we are all affected, but there are those who are affected the most. So how do we ensure that when this happens, those who are affected the most will be the first on the line to benefit from this? We also ask the question, who ensures that the repair does not become rhetoric? Because that's what has been happening. The IMF will come with the policies, they will tell you what to do, but at the back of their mind, there are conditionalities that even those in government will not want to tell you. And then I come to and ask myself, why youth and young people are central to this? And Shem, when giving his remarks, gave the statistics used are the majority, and they're the most affected. When someone tells you that you're the leaders of tomorrow, but here we are today, the priority is not you, it's not your life, it's not education. You go to school, when you go to school, you graduate. Then you become frustrated in life, the rate of crime increases in society, and all these are tied to debt and to the economic injustice that we are facing. Again, youth are the most mobilized. I am 100% guaranteed that at one point, my colleague here, Mr. Buluma, will one day end in parliament and hopefully to the higher office. Yes. And one of his entry points will be the youths. And you see, youth are the most mobilized people. So if we don't get them involved in the discussion like this, then it means we are going to leave them out. The third one is the bridge builders. You can connect lived experiences or lack of access to quality education and global justice education. So when you look at all these problems and connecting to the youth, then you ask yourself, what is the essence of social accountability in this? And I can respond to this in 4 ways. It means making power answerable. It means demanding that we don't just demand from the West. We also have to demand from our government, because it is our government, some of them, who go out there. We have instances in Kenya where the former Attorney General told us that at one point he was forced to sign a contract at the airport. They just brought the papers and just sign, and he refused. And you see, that's how we have ended up where we are today, because some of the things that we sign as debt, we sign things we don't know. We come to realize later. The second essence of social accountability is ensuring that public participation becomes a right. That for any debt acquisitions must be subjected to public participation, and people must see, why are we borrowing? What are we going to do with the borrowed money? And how are we going to pay it? What is the framework? Is there a condition that when we are borrowing, the priority becomes paying debt and not education and not health? The third one would be shifting the narrative in terms of future conversation, where we are positioning debt justice as a generational justice. Because I am affected today, and when we were going at our office, we are going through the debt register. We are still repaying debt that were taken in 1970s. So you can see how it is a generational issue. Thank you.
Okay, great. A round of applause for Byron. There's a lot you're bringing out about holding leaders accountable. There's a lot you're bringing about lived experiences and how we ensure that it's incorporated in global justice education around the issues that we're centering in this conversation. You also talk a lot about public participation, which indeed is the most formal way for us to actually engage in different elements that are going on and coming up a lot. And, you know, sometimes I sit down and think about this discourse of lived experiences, and I think it's happened to almost all of us at different points of our years in life, you know. And do you ever find yourself in a situation where you go to a supermarket and you're like, I think this thing was around 80 Kenyan shillings last time. Why is it 150 this time? Or even in South Africa with the rand, it's probably 100 last year. This year it's about 500, you know. And there's so many lived experiences that keep coming up. Beyond that is even just what job creation looks like, what social protection looks like, access to very simple elements. You see this lived experiencing coming up. And centering those to the conversation around global justice, reparations, debt justice, and everything is very critical, because now people are able to see the interlink very well. So thank you for bringing up that idea for social accountability and making sure that lived experiences are very clear. Now, Samba, I want to come to you particularly because you're my core focal point in Kenya for young parliamentarians, based on the work that you do and how you've been very vocal about how legislation has been very integral in this process, and how we also have to make sure that MPs, that's members of parliament, are engaged as much as possible to represent our voice. And I want to tie that also to what Honorable Vuyo brought out a lot yesterday during his opening remarks, and the panels that he was able to sit in, and different parliamentarians who we see in the room. I can see Honorable Chidakwa there. I can see Madam Gifty right there on the side as well. I can see very many people who've been central in this discourse in terms of the parliamentarian and governance angle. So I want to throw it to you to center this conversation from that angle and tell us more about how you'd want young people to engage in this conversation. Over to you.
Thank you, Lorette, and thank you for having me in this panel. I feel very honored. Allow me to just teach you a slogan so that when you go home, beyond what you know about South Africa, Lesotho, and others, you can have something to remember about Kenya. So when I say comrade power, you say power. When I say comrade T-beam, you say T-beam. When I say comrade Tialala, you say Tialala. Are we clear? Comrade power.
Power.
Comrade T-beam.
T-beam.
Comrade Tialala.
Tialala.
Comrade Zaga Zaga. Thank you so very much. As you've been told, my name is Anthony Buluma. When I grow up, I want to be a comedian, but because we are handling some very serious issues, allow me to get serious. I have just been reflecting as everyone was giving their contributions, starting from Shem. And I think I need to put a face to what we are discussing. Because colleagues, when we discuss debt, we are not just discussing abstract in terms of numbers of reports that are dusting our shelves and all that. We are discussing classrooms without teachers, hospitals without medication. We are discussing young people without jobs in a continent where they are a majority. The truth is that all this is because every shilling, every naira, every cent that is made in Africa, a good chunk of it is taken out of Africa to go and service the debts that we owe to some of this country. And in most of the cases, most of these debts are not even legitimate because they have been acquired through illegitimate means. And it's important for us to actually be clear so that I give context to my submission as I respond to your question. I strongly believe that Africa's debt crisis is not accidental. And I think that has been ably demonstrated by almost everyone who's been giving remarks from as early as yesterday. The truth is that a lot of this debt is manufactured, and by design, it is a continuation of colonial exploitation, unfair global financial rules, and in most instances, local corruption, because we know what our leaders are doing in terms of these debt arrangements. So, bringing in the component of young parliamentarians, where I've worked with them since 2013, the truth is that they sit in a very unique position, mainly because apart from them being lawmakers, they command the largest demographic in our continent, talking of population of over 70% of Africans who are young people. So the truth is that the young parliamentarians have an opportunity to define the destiny of Africa, and particularly the next generation of Africans. So that means that as Parliament, we must stop treating debt just as a technical matter for economists. We must make it a significant political issue, because that is what it is. We must raise it as a political question. We must raise it as a sovereignty issue. And we must also raise it as an issue centering on justice for Africans. If we must go back to the bush, like our fathers did, it's about time, Honorable Vuyo, you run back to the bush and come out with the mantra of Shaka Zulu. Because the truth is that, good people, the kind of justice that we require in terms of handling the debt question in Africa should be geared towards, one, what has been mentioned, pushing for debt cancellation, and not treating this as a favor extended to African countries or charity. Because in most instances, our leaders are bargaining from a point of charity. You know, the attitude of, oh yeah, please consider this, consider we are suffering. It should not be the attitude. It is reparations owed to Africa, and that has been made clear. And I think that is the attitude that parliamentarians must adopt in our approaches, particularly the young ones. Again, for centuries, you all know that a lot of the African wealth has been taken out of Africa, ranging from issues of slavery. When the colonial powers were present, they plundered our resources. Of course, the issues of illicit financial flows that have been cited. And this is continuing, but in modern fashion, because we have new practices like unfair trade. You have strategies that are being employed like tax evasions by these multinationals that are operating in our soil. And this is not development financing, as has been made to look like. It's a structured dependency strategy by the so-called colonial masters. So the question that you asked me was, so what role can young parliamentarians play? You know the role of parliament is legislate, oversight, and represent the people. So one, we must begin to legislate for transparency and accountability. I strongly believe, and it's something that we were trying to push in Kenya, no loan should ever be contracted without parliamentary approval. And not just that, beyond the parliamentary approval, there must be a public disclosure component to that, which means if Benedicta from Kenya has to pay 7 shillings out of the 10 she makes, she has to have approved for Kenya to actually take that loan. So public disclosure is essential, and I think it's something that as young parliamentarians we can be able to push for. Because if we allow borrowing to continue being done in secret, then the consequences will always come to us secretly but impactful. And therefore, we must make it as illegitimate as it can be, so that those who aspire or have appetite to keep borrowing, let them borrow at their own risk. Secondly, there must be a constant demand for debt audits. I can tell you, in most of the African countries, if you ask the debt question, most of the time the responses are hidden under the carpet. You will never get the accurate response. They will give you very difficult responses so that you're not able to have an appreciation of it. So, and I think it's something that we are also pushing for in Kenya, the independent audits of all our public debts. In fact, in one instance, one of our politicians has gone to court claiming that he believes that Kenya has literally offsetted all our debts. We actually don't owe anyone any money. And he wants the government to counter that assertion. And you can actually see the government is looking at him like a madman, you know? Because it's like, we've been collecting and we've been dealing, but how comes we don't appear like we're reducing the debt? It keeps increasing. And thirdly, we must also reorient our budgets, because parliamentarians sit at the heart of budget making. I don't know about other countries, but Kenya, the budgetary role is with parliamentarians. And what we can do with this is refuse to pass any budget where servicing of debt outpaces investments in the essentials in our country, education, issues of healthcare, and even youth employment. Because why would we be exporting our youth as laborers to other countries so that we have enough money to service debts as opposed to provide opportunities for them? And fourthly, I strongly believe, and it's something we've started as African young parliamentarians, is building solidarity movements, which means that the collective action by young people must manifest now like never before. We want what is happening in South Africa should be able to be reflected in Kenya. What is happening in Accra, Ghana, should be able to manifest in Egypt by having, in Kenya, if we table a motion on legislative audit of debt, it should be possible for Amira from Egypt to do a similar piece of audit question on the public debt in Egypt, so that it's reflected across the continent as collective action. And then fifth but not the least, we must introduce a new concept of naming and shaming the people who have this appetite for debt. I think, Honorable Vuyo, one of the things we should proudly do as Africa Young Parliamentarians with support of the stakeholders who are here, if we can be able to identify the names of the leaders within Africa who have the appetite for these debts and the so-called multinationals who are giving this debt, and we do every year an annual name and shame of countries of debt. You know, Africans doing it, because a lot of the reports we rely on are mostly external. we don't have our own mechanism. So you can imagine if it's the young parliamentarians releasing a report, naming and shaming presidents who have the tendencies of borrowing without stopping. And then lastly, we need global action. I think like never before, Africa needs to sit at the decision-making table. It cannot be that the people who are framing and designing the architecture for debt do it for us, and then they come and loan us, and then they come and exploit us, they come and extract from us, because they know very well that they set the rules that we cannot be able to adhere to. And finally, colleagues, let's be honest. If the lenders will not negotiate, if they will continue to profit from us, then we must build the courage enough to refuse what Bekele was saying. We must refuse to pay those illegitimate debts. We must connect this struggle to the wider fights that have been in the continent of Africa, and we must make it a generational fight. Link it to issues of climate justice, as has been mentioned, bring out the question of trade justice and reparative justice. Because debt is no longer what we've been used to it as an economic issue. It's the front line of the modern African liberation struggle of the 21st century. In closing, I strongly believe, going by the Kenyan demonstration through the Gen Z, I believe that this generation will be the first one, and particularly from the young parliamentarians' perspective, who will truly have the numbers and the voice to change Africa's trajectory as far as this question of debt is concerned. And we will, as young members of parliament and young people, will refuse to inherit chains disguised as loans. We will refuse to inherit a continent mortgaged to creditors. We will be a generation that will legislate, resist, and most importantly, mobilize other young Africans to free ourselves from debt and from every structure that keeps Africa dependent. Thank you.
Aha, okay. I thought you would end with the slogan to say "Comrade Power," but I don't know what the concept of naming and shaming will come in the form of, whether it's going to be a magazine, a film. I'm not sure, but it's very interesting that we can see parliamentarians really trying to make sure that the concept of transparency and accountability is centered in this conversation. And it's also very interesting because you can see young parliamentarians coming up to actually ask the questions. And so many networks are coming up as well, the Africa Young Parliamentarians Network, Kenya Young Parliamentarians Association, and there's so many that are coming up as we keep going forward. And they're really complementing our governance systems that exist and trying to also engage members of parliament that already exist. So Samba, thank you very much for contextualizing that very well and for giving us opportunities for solidarity in this process. And I think you should lead the next movement as we keep asking for more slogans in this process. John, I want to come to you now because the Youth for Tax Justice Network has been in the process of centering young people's voices in discourse around economic justice. Why I say economic justice is because we have seen you engage young people in the tax justice discourse. We have seen you engage young people in the debt justice discourse. We have seen you engage young people in the climate justice discourse. And it's gone even as far as gender, because you've been able to significantly identify young people across all those areas and bring them together in one front. So from where you sit, what are some of the modalities that have been successful? What has this process been like? And I think with you, because you're the Youth for Tax Justice Network, how can everybody in the room contribute to your mission? Over to you, John.
Thank you very much, Lorit. It is a bit difficult, a question, especially after this esteemed partner has spoken. I don't know what I can add or even what I can remove. But I think from the perspective of Youth for Tax Justice Network, first of all, we are taking it from the bottom to the top. Because at the end of the day, the people who are most affected by some of these injustices are the people who are the grassroots, the young people at the grassroots. So what we are doing, we are trying to get that voice from the bottom and taking it to the top. And how we are doing that, of course, it is through influencing the conversations at the global level. Honorable here was talking about ensuring that we participate in those global discussions, especially the UN Tax Convention on tax, and then the one on debt, and then even the financing for development process, which has been happening and continues happening. But so that's one of the things we are doing, trying to get that conversation from the bottom to the top, but also trying to simplify this information. How do we make it easily palatable for young people to understand and take in, to ensure that it is relevant to whatever challenges they are going through? And so I think what we can continue doing is, I think it is more of a collective thing, doing the collective effort. I mean, Martha here was speaking about saying we are not going to pay. But if Kenya says they're not going to pay, and then another country says, I will not mention, another country says they are paying, they go ahead with the paying, how do we succeed with that? You know, there has to be some sort of a collective effort, and since as Africa we are mainly represented by Africa Union, you would expect that Africa Union would champion that. I don't know how, whether they are willing to go that route, but I think whichever we put it, we have to ensure that there is some sort of a collective unit. And it also goes back to our leaders. We've been speaking about accountability, but now our leaders are the ones who are going into those rooms and discussing and talking about these things here. Most of the times, we are not there. Most of the times, of course, you'll do some research, present a paper, and you show it to your leaders and hope that they will get out there and present your issues. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But the whole point is putting them on as much pressure as possible. How do we ensure that, especially for the parliamentarians, ensuring that we are going to be able to legislate for these reparations as well? It also doesn't work in unison. Kenya can say, okay, yes, we say we want our reparations, but then other countries don't. So I think it goes back to having this collective effort, but also trying to ensure that we have these conversations right from the grassroots to the global level. We cannot ignore any of the stages, regional level, continental level, and then also going back to the global level. And I like what the AU has done, especially with the LOM declaration, pushing for this framework convention on debt. And I'm hoping that the issues of debt cancellation will come up there and we can push for that. But also, of course, I cannot forget what the young Kenyans have done. Of course, I was speaking about it again, and someone was telling, but we've been speaking that the Kenyans, Gen Zs have made an effort and they have done a lot, but where are the results? I mean, they keep saying, okay, the president must go, but I don't know whether they are not pushing so hard. But I mean, it is good effort. It is good effort for the rest of us who to take up that courage and ensure that we keep fighting and then take off our legs off the brake. So I think for us, it is about taking up these spaces as well. From the UN, ensuring that we are there, we bring out the young people's voice, ensuring that there is some equitable discussions, intergenerational justice in these discussions, and ensuring that young people are fully represented. So I think I'll end it for now. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. I think from from his conversation, we had the idea of collective action, which is replicated across all the panelists. And now I just want to open up for quick plenary for about 9 to 10 minutes. Can I see the hands? Wow. Okay. Actually, you know what? Everybody's going to speak. So where's the microphone? I think, Sarah, if you can help me have the first microphone on this side, and then we can have another one running from this other side so that we mix the conversations around the room. Because I want everybody to speak, and the next session will be at 4, and I want us to close with a transition period. Let's try and have a minute for submission. That's okay? Doesn't even sound like solidarity, but it sounds like it's okay. So I'll start with you.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Abbas. Africa is a youthful continent, over 60% and 60% under 25. But this kind of uncontrollable debt, over $1 trillion debt stock by 2025 and over $100 billion debt service, it's really affecting negatively on youth in two ways, in my opinion. First, this affects when they are young in terms of the nutritional health, education they are denied. And also, this affects them when they join the labor market. They are the ones who are going to be paying in the future. Now, what can they do? Or are they doing something to deal with that? In my opinion, it's not easy for them because of, number one, they don't have consistent energy to build a narrative, and number two, they don't have power. So my question is direct. I have two questions. The first one is to the youth network. How can youth energy being organized consistently so that when they have an issue, demonstrate, they cannot be easily infiltrated and just stopped on the way? And the other question is directed to the honorable young parliamentarian. How can youth representative in the government be improved?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'm Nyawira. Then the mic can come here.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Nyawira Waheto, and I work with the Resource Center for Women and Girls. I like that this conversation is centered on youth. However, I don't really like using the word youth because it's more often than not masculinized, and the panel is a demonstration of this. You know, and when we talk about, I think Shem said, youth are under 25. I mean, over 60% of youth in Africa are under 25. I wonder how many on the panel are under 25. So we are talking about representation, but we have to live it. We have to practice it, right? We have to make sure that to bridge the intergenerational inequality gap you talked about, Lurit, that we are intentional in preparing young people for leadership. Leadership is not by chance. There has to be an intentional preparation of leadership. One of the first things I always say when I came to AFCOD is I asked, where are the young women? And in my intentionality and my holding myself to account, I brought a young woman to AFCOD. So as we are sitting here and saying we need more, they need to be in spaces, we also have to look inwardly and say, what are we doing in our capacity to make sure that those young people are in these spaces and in these platforms and listening and learning, right? What's at stake? I think when I think about the Gen Z movement, which has been referenced a lot in this conference, there were a lot of young women who put their bodies on the line. So as we are looking at youth being present and youth advocating for change and debt justice, we also have to ask ourselves, do young people understand that the different types of injustices? Because if we are in the streets and fighting against whatever injustice we are fighting, and then the same people who are doing that are the same ones who are perpetrating sexual violence against young women who are also on the streets. So you're fighting a certain injustice, but also perpetrating another one, right? So it's a kind of irony, you know, it's quite ironic. I did want to highlight those things so that not because we have all of the answers now, but just to think about it. What are we doing in our individual spaces? And I know like there are many organizations represented here who are doing great work to prepare the next generation for current leadership, not future leadership, as was referenced. So I applaud that. I think we also need to really audit leaders in our African countries. As we are auditing the kind of debt we have, who are the leaders representing us in these platforms? We need radical and bold parliaments, not captured parliaments, who will not do anything for us, who are and not caring about the general populace.
Thank you,
and
Nyawera.
lastly,
Thank you,
I just
thank
wanted
you.
to say that still on the representation agenda, there was a professor in the morning who said that Africa is the only continent where water flows upward. We have to think about, when we're thinking about intersectionality, there are some populations who don't even know Africa has water. As we are complaining, it flows upward. Let's not forget, let's remember those who are not on the table, they are not in the spaces, and don't even know that Africa has water.
Thanks, Nyawera. When you look at me, I don't look under 25. I'm just doing a quick confirmation as the mic moves around. You don't see some representation. Yeah, on a light note, you can proceed. The mic is already here, so we'll have him, you after, Kamala, Diana. Since Diana and Michelle are there together, you'll just pass it around each other, and then their colleagues.
Okay, I'll be brief. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity. Africa with Christian Aid. My question to Shema, Comrade Martha. Post-reconstruction of Europe, Germany, 1953. So the powers sat, and in order to support Germany to rebuild, Germany was, given a very sweet deal. So they canceled the debt by 50%, and the remaining was to be repaid whenever Germany made a trade surplus. And of that trade surplus, Germany would only pay 3% of that. And when it comes to Africa, what we are getting is, debt rescheduling, debt restructuring, and then we are talking about debt, debt dodging and all that. My question to both of you is, when we see the kind of deal that Germany got, the Marshall Plan, and what Africa is getting, what kind of institutions do we need to ensure that we have a fair debt governance ecosystem that really builds Africa's structural transformation, not structural adjustment like we are currently doing? I thank you.
Thank you. The mic, there's a mic, is there a mic on this side? Hold on, yes, please go. Please stand.
Okay.
Stand. Where's the mic next? It's here? Okay.
Yes, thank you so much for the wonderful insights that were coming from the panel. I really like the idea of the name and shame, and I really like what you mentioned in the keynote about us as Africa having a lot of resources that we are not really leveraging on. Taking, for instance, Zimbabwe, we know that Zimbabwe is the largest producer of lithium in Africa, with over 220 tons discovered so far, mega tons discovered so far, and is actually sitting on number 6 in the global community, and it's really something that we'll need to look into to see how we can value add that. I have a question, 2 questions actually, that is directed to Martha, and the other one is directed to John. So to John, I would want to know what are the monitoring and evaluation mechanisms that you have in place to see the progress that you're doing with the youth, and also what are the sustainability mechanisms that you have in place. And then to Martha, you mentioned that you do a lot of work on climate. I'm very much interested in knowing how you're supporting young people to participate in the global convenings on climate, not just in terms of accreditation, not just in terms of funding, but also in terms of being involved as climate negotiators. To what extent are you capacitating them so that they participate as climate negotiators? Thank you.
Thank you. Next mic.
Thank you so much. My name is Kamara. From Tanzania. I work with a Gender Participation Initiative. So, from the conversation, I think in Africa, if you look at the young people in our continent, it's an homogeneous group, yeah. And surprisingly enough, if you took among of those people in the panel, if you took two of them and you ask them aside, like, hey, what are you fighting for? And you promise them to get something better, the next day they won't join the other. That's a challenge you have been facing in Africa. So you strategize, you put the movement forward, you put the focus and everything. And the next day, the politician, they will just go and talk to 3, 4 of you, and you betray the struggle. And so they start reorganizing again. The way you just go back to reorganize, the age is already gone. So the other young people, they will start coming back to organize themselves. That's what Africa has been facing, a challenge and a big struggle. And sometimes if I look at this continent, I don't know, but I think, you know, there was those stories that in those days people died in the other continent. For those who were the wrongdoers, they were to be born back in Africa so that they repay for what they did in those days in other continents. Because, like, if you look at the African context on how we are organizing and reorganize, it keeps giving me something to think more about how are we mobilizing as a young generation. But then, my brother, the last one. My brother is working with members of parliament. And maybe we need to ask ourselves, if you engage the young members of parliament, are you engaging them as a member of the party that responds to the core of their country party manifestation, or because they are young? Because that's another challenge even in Tanzania we are facing. If you just go, you will find them at the age they are young. But in practical, they respond much on their party manifestation rather than the core of the young people. So sometimes even if you give them your agenda, they will not even implement them in the parliament because it's not on their party manifesto. So how are we changing the strategy from there?
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll make it very quick. Thank you to the panelists. Coming from the Financing for Development process, I just want to comment that we are making progress as Africa. It's not really where we want to be, but we are making a lot of progress. And we saw this with our African leaders actually standing up to the global north during the negotiations. So Honorable Buluma, we do have a lot of progress happening in negotiations, and even John. And that was shown also by the leadership of the Africa Group, which is actively pushing for debt issues. And this will continue through the UN Debt Convention and the workout mechanisms. So there is a lot of progress being made, as much as it's not where we want to be, just to add that. And then how do we take advantage of the digital revolution? Kenyans are known for tweeting, making things trend, and these are young people leading, and it even led to the president calling the young people to actually have a conversation with them. So we do have a big opportunity with the digital revolution for young people. And then something finally about the youth. Sometimes you're taken as an afterthought. Like, people are called and then you realize there are no young people. So how do we ensure that youth are not an afterthought, but rather they are part of the process from the beginning to the end?
Thank you.
Thank you, Lorit. I want to write from the response that she gave, because I wanted to ask the same question, but I'll just give one suggestion. Zimbabwe was given sanctions in 2000. And since then, we failed to pay the debt, but the country survived. We are still there 20 years down the line, 25 years down the line. We are still there. The country is not on its knees. So my suggestion is to say, when the negotiations are not giving us results, why don't we stand alone as Africa? Why don't we rebel? Why don't we say, okay, fine, West stay at the West. Africa will stay as Africa. Because we have the resources. We are feeding a global north. We are supporting them with our resources and everything. So if we stop, if we say, okay, fine, Africa, let's look inside. Let's look at ourselves. The money that we're paying, the debt, right? It's around 60 billion. and ODA were getting around 40 billion. Why don't we then take the 60 billion, put it in our African bank, and start supporting ourselves, and forget about the global north, forget about the west, forget about those. And I think, in my view, they'll come to us crawling, because they've got nothing. They've got nothing, but they're counting on one of us. They're taking advantage of our poverty in our African countries, you know, and by one of us. So let's get united. Let's approach AU. Let's go to the UN as Africa with one voice and start saying enough is enough. We are okay with the West. We're okay with the debt issue. We want to look into Africa and see how best can we survive on our own. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle?
Okay, thanks. My name is Michelle from Kenya, and I think my question will be to Byron, because from a social accountability perspective, you talked about public participation being a critical tool. Now, from the Kenyan context, for instance, public participation is enshrined in the constitution and in legislation. But then how do we make sure that this is not merely a tick box exercise? How do we make sure it's structured, it's sustained, it's meaningful and impactful? To make sure the things that we're really trying to push from the citizenry actually have impact in policy and, you know, how we handle debt.
That's a very nice question. Yes, Gift, there's a mic there. And then there was a question here at the front, yeah? I don't want to leave you out, so maybe you can start. Okay. Okay, you can end.
Thank you. My name is Gifty. I'm from the Parliament of Ghana, and I'm really happy with the file that the Honorable Member of the Youth Parliamentarian is putting across. In fact, I was excited when I heard that this program is coming to Ghana. But I'm asking, where are your colleagues in Ghana that you can extend the baton to keep the fire burning, the fire from Eastern Africa, the fire from Kenya? Whilst you are in Accra, where are they? I want to urge you on that reach out to your colleagues, the young parliamentarians. We have 65 of them in Ghana's parliament. They are youthful, exuberant, they have the energy you have. And so I want you to be the icon, to link up with them, because you're already in Accra. And reaching out to them is not that difficult. Aside that, if we, the youth, we've seen the way forward, we shouldn't keep it to ourselves. As you said, let's collaborate, let's team up, let's extend the chain all over Africa. That is the only way we can prove to the other world that we have what it takes to make our continent what it has to be. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Our last question in the room.
Yes, mine is not really a question. It's building on what Nyawira said and a little bit on Michelle. Well, it's touching on, so it's great that I did. Yeah. I wanted to speak on how we have this perception that we have an understanding that youth are today's leaders, right? But how many of those young people have an understanding that they are leaders because of the certain positions that they are in, class and so many other issues, right? So I just wanted to encourage the parliamentarians or anybody else, like Martha is doing, you know, she's training young people, and extend it beyond to those who have the privilege to actually participate in such issues and find means. I know we were having a crunch on resources because of the EODs that were flying out of the US and so many other issues and on aid. But how can we take that responsibility as not just youth, but as a way of, it's coming out. Okay, yes. Thank you very much.
Yes, that was actually very great. And thank you everybody for your submissions in this discussion that we've had. One critical assignment I want to give each and every one of you as we leave this room, so that we do not feel again that nobody is represented. The Youth for Tax Justice convenes, and it convenes across the year, multiple young people, regardless of their demographic, regardless of their various indicators that may push for equality or inequality. I invite each and every one of you to nominate at least 5 young people to the Youth for Tax Justice Network to engage every year. That's the biggest assignment I'm going to give each and every one of you as we leave this room. And even as we think about it, is that there are so many advocacy processes that we undertake And it means that there's space for any young people. Okay, we'll increase the demographic to 35, but now Nyawera, bring under 25s. I have mandated that to you, at least 50 of them by the time we're getting to the end of 2026. That's fine. Now I want to move back to the panelists. For the first time in any engagement we have had, I am going to ask you to respond in 1 minute. Forgive me. But I want us to do it in this order. We will begin with Byron. Then we will transition to Anthony. Then we will move to John. Right? So let's begin with those three. Then I will decide what happens on this side. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Michelle, thank you for your question. It is a question that comes up each and every time we are having a meeting beyond youth engagement. And it is true that public participation is enshrined within our constitution. But the question we always have, is it effective enough? Because showing up is different with now making the public participation becomes effective. So one of the ways that we initially thought would make public participation be effective was through legislation. And right now we have a public participation bill coming up. When I refer to Kenyan context, we have a public participation bill coming up. But during our engagement in terms of the reviewing the public participation bill, we realized that the insiders within the government are always ahead of us. It seems like someone already took the bill and submitted it to Parliament. So we realized that whatever we were discussing was just like ticking the box. So for us to have an effective public participation, there will need to be a very clear feedback mechanism. If we come to this discussion, we give feedback or we comment on the discussion at that place, how do we ensure that at the end of the day we can see the report from this room? And how do we ensure that we are well informed that whatever we discussed inform the decision that came out of this discussion? So for me, that will be the effective way to ensure that public participation becomes effective. If we can be able to have a clear feedback mechanism where the young person at the grassroots level who participated, whether it is during the budget making process, can be able to track that we said we wanted money to be allocated on health. Let's see whether our feedback was considered at that time. At the time now the Parliament approved the budget, can we then again come back and follow and see, we said we wanted 20% to go on this. Have they allocated 20% or they have refused and retained the 2% that they always give? So I think for me, the feedback mechanism will be clear in terms of ensuring that public participation becomes effective. And lastly is ensuring that young people get involved, understand the context and the meaning of public participation. And when we get young people to get involved, it means that beyond the physical engagement we are having, that's where now the digital artism is now coming up. And you see there's a lady on social media, Kenya, called Shola. You've seen what is happening with SHA, where people are able to pick information that for me I wouldn't get. But you see people are now taking deep dive into the health center that exists, the amount that have been allocated. People know how to maneuver within the system and get those information. So that's when the public participation will become effective. Thank you.
Okay. Byron, do you have a parting shot?
My parting shot, yes, is for us to get involved. And it is not easy. Along the way, we will get frustrated because as a young person, I know I'm not under 25, Nyawira and Sonia. I know I'm not under 25, but one of the challenges that we have every day is along the way, I feel like the man or the woman ahead of me have tried and failed. So I asked, there's a likelihood that I might also fail. So the frustration that comes with that is something that also we need to work on, because if we don't work as a team and developing a winning coalition, as has been mentioned, across Africa, then we might get along the way and say, when the president of Kenya goes outside, he talks so nice. The moment he comes back to the country, he talks different thing. When another government of another country goes out, they talk different thing. So how do we ensure, number one, we have a collective voice and messaging, where when we go out, we say one thing, and I don't speak of, when she speaks about climate finance, how do I get behind her and support that messaging? Yes.
Thank you, Viron. Mr. Anthony.
I think one of the questions that was directed to me was, how do we get more young people into leadership? It is obvious that young people need to be on the negotiating table and not the menu, because for far too long, many of us have been on the menu. And the only way is, one, we amplify your voice. Number two, make your name and face known, because people vote for people they know by virtue of their faces and their names. And then thirdly, we must consistently amplify your voice. In Kenya, those who are from Kenya know, like at the Young Parliamentarian, we host young people for parliamentary experience every year. In fact, this August we hosted around 100 of them. Inside Parliament, they become members of Parliament for that day. They adopt resolutions that we table on their behalf on the floor of the Parliament of Kenya. That is one way of giving them the confidence that they can actually be members of Parliament. So we must put practice to our assertions. And then there was the question around, how do we balance the political party interest and the young parliamentarians? I think that's why in my submission, I advocated for the solidarity component. It works because you don't blame it on the individual member. You blame it on the collective role. So if we came out of here with a resolution to the effect that we want governments, African governments, to implement a certain policy, then you task a member of parliament to table. The report will be tabled in the name of this meeting, but tabled by and on behalf of all of us by a young member of parliament. So there are strategies that we employ to balance, because we also exist in that political reality that it's not easy for young parliamentarians to, in many instances, contradict their party position. So we employ those kind of strategies. On the Ghana component, we just, from your parliament, we were 3 of us. We had a very good meeting with Honorable Samuel, and Dr. Zeneta Rawlings is one of the members of the Young Parliamentarians Network. So we are trying to co-opt Ghana. It was not within our powers on who to invite for this forum, but you can be sure, if given a chance, many of them are very willing. You have a very vibrant young parliamentarians. And it was exciting to visit the parliament and interact with the very young legislators. As to my parting shot, at one point there was a task that needed to be done. And there were 3 characters who were involved in this task. There was anybody, somebody, and nobody. So anybody was told to do the work, and he told somebody to do the work. Somebody, instead of doing the work, told nobody to do the work. So ultimately, nobody did the work. Let's not be victims of those 3 characters. Africa, there's task ahead of us. If you wait for somebody to tell nobody, we will never get this done. The significant problems we face as a continent will never be solved with the same thinking of lamenting that caused that problem. We must ascend to a higher thinking for us to be able to address the problems. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. So I wanted John to go next, but Martha has a session going on, and the next session is about to start. Colleagues, the concept of time is beating us, so yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Young people, you know, remembering that age, as the Tanzanian colleague said, it's on a spectrum. It's not static. It's not like disability or your sex, although I hear these days you can change your sex, but, you know, to understand that, but to also what you were saying, like to remember that we stand on the shoulders of those who were ahead of us, okay? But I can assure you, like for instance, for me, I have contact with more than 300 young people across Africa. And someone asked, how do you do that? There is one called the Nairobi School Summer School of Climate Justice, okay? That is under the PAGJA. Right now, it's being held in Addis because it is part of the Africa Climate Summit. So every year, my mission in life these days is to radicalize as many young Africans as possible. There is nothing negative about radicalization, you know. It's just to be unequivocally convicted that there is injustice, and I'm not going to be apologetic about it. That's it. So that is one. The other is in my previous organization, we made sure that we hired, because someone said, the youth, we are not talking about homogeneous people. So we used to be deliberate in bringing young people with disability, okay, to work for us, to intern for us. We were deliberate in hiring female web developers, female AI experts, female data scientists. So let's also not think that these are public participation, for instance. You know, someone mentioned. Do you know how hard it is to read a budget document? So who is training those young people how to convert from PDF to Excel? You make sure that it's consistent, and then you know how to read the codes. So these are the things that we need to think about when you say capacity building, and how do you have now that seamless transition from one generation to another. And of course, interrogating ourselves and reflecting, am I doing enough for my brothers and sisters as well as my children? Finally, I wanted to say something. People talked about Gen Z. For me, I am so sorry. I lived in Kenya for more than a decade, and I knew it was going to fail from the start, and I was one of the naysayers. You know why? Because they are not based on ideology. Which ideology are they against?
Yes.
Are they rejecting greed, or are they rejecting the person who is eating it? Why did Kisumu youth refuse to join where I told them to sit down? Because it's not greed that they were rejecting, that we are rejecting. It is who is eating this time. Reject capitalism and be with the working class, you will succeed. Finally, before I leave, my friend, and here Diana was saying there is progress. For me, there is no progress in this ill, sick, cruel, evil system that we operate. If you want a genuine outcome, go the way of Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger. Thank you.
Ah, nice. Okay, okay. I want the mic to go back there. John, I will give you 30 seconds to wrap it up as you invite Alan to give a 3-minute submission, and then Shem closes this session and we're done. If we're able to do this by 4:10, would be great.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think there were so many questions directed to me, but in the interest of time, I think to my brother behind there, we need to understand our history. We need to know where we are coming from as young people. I think that is something that is missing. I would have given the example of what's happening in South Africa, killing each other, and yet some of the people they are killing, their ancestors fought for their independence, helped them fight against apartheid. Now, if you don't know that history, you're going to go ahead and start attacking a fellow African. I mean, I think we have to bring back that history to the young people that are existing today and remind them, you know. So, in a nutshell, that's what I can answer on that. Then, I think Diana asked about the digital revolution. I think that is very, very important. One of the ways we are doing it is trying to simplify information and use it and share it there, sensitize and inform. But also the digital revolution also has a challenge connected to it, especially in terms of false information. Very, 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 very terrible and very misleading. So we need to be careful of that as well. The false information that moves on these digital platforms, it is very rampant and it can be very, very misleading. Then how do we ensure, okay, there's something about governance. I think we need to have still back to our history, understanding our history, but we also need to have leaders who are selfless. I don't know how we can get that, but because sometimes you have someone who you consider selfless, when they get into the system, somehow it swallows them up, and they are no longer as selfless as they were. So it is a difficult thing, but I think getting back to our roots and understanding what we need and what we want to achieve, I think is very important. So I think for now I'll keep it that.
Yes,
Thank
allow
you.
me to stop you there. Now, this is how we're going to end this session. Nyawera, I would like you to occupy this seat for purposes of representation of women in the room. 1. 2, Alan, I'd like you to come give your 3-minute submission, and then Shem closes with 1 minute. And we're done.
It's not going to be 3 minutes. I just came to give a sort of a way forward. I am Hereza Alan, team leader at Youth for Tax Justice Network, and I'm glad to be here, and I'm happy that you're here. A lot has been discussed, and there are key things that came out on the way forward. Someone talked about a common position, someone talked about continuous engagement, someone talked about engaging on all levels, and someone talked about inclusiveness, and then also building the capacity of young people. So we are saying at YTJN that starting this September, we are launching a Youth FfD Collective, Accountability Collective, and we want to invite all of you that are working with young people, as young people, for young people, to join us, to engage. This journey started in Seville, but the idea is that the FfD happens every 10 years. So we said we're not going to wait for 10 years to engage again. For the young people that were in Seville, you know what happened. But we are saying that for every year, we are going to engage. Rit said that there are quite a number of opportunities within the year where we can build the capacities of young people, where we can collaborate, we can build solidarity across the movements. And the idea is that for wherever our leaders are, they should hear the same message from young people. And if you remember what Honorable Dondea said, that we're having the UN Framework Convention because of what African CSOs did, because of what now young Africans are going to do. So we are saying that throughout the year, we're inviting you to join us. There are quite a number of things that we have set out to do. Initially, I was supposed to go through all of them, but because of time, I'm not going to be able to do. To say, let us engage continuously so that by the next FfD, we have our convention on debt, we have our convention on tax cooperation and the 5 protocols that are envisioned. And as young people, we have the resources that we need to finance critical sectors that are critical to our development. So I'm just saying that we are launching, we're supposed to do that now, but because of time, we're not going to be able to. We are inviting you to join us as we make this Youth FfD Accountability Collective a success. Thank you very much. I hope I didn't use 3 minutes.
Thank you. I think everything has been spoken. And my work is just to close it, and just 2 things in a very short time. Starting with my friend, you talk about I can't remember the name. Yes, you talked about the German debt cancellation. That's 1953, the London debt cancellation. And you know why the German found it easy to work its way is because after the cancellation, they made sure that their domestic resource mobilization was stable. Look at Africa. We had the Jubilee 2000. Was the Africa Days not cancelled? Part of it, right? But where can we talk about our debt being cancelled because you can't see anything? So in Kenya, there is a say that you blame the wild cat and the hen, right? So we are the hen and they are the wild cat. But here is the case. They don't put a gun on us to borrow. We go to borrow, knowing very well that we are borrowing at more than 10% interest rate. So there is a solution from us that we can pick, that even before we go and borrow, we need to ask ourselves, what are we having that can make us be stable before we go out? Nyawira, thank you for coming here. Because before, I worked with Aphrodite before, and I know in their conferences, they bring young people, and there are very many young people here, I know very well. But all in all, guys, we have opportunity to make sure that youth voices are heard in every global corners. And this is the right time. Thank you, Alan, and thank you, Laureate, for this. We are not stopping here. In Africa Union, we had the debt conference in Togo. We are coming up with a common Africa position on debt. And some of the issues in that document is youth involvement, domestic resource mobilization, because we have realized, why should we keep on crying, oh, they're stealing from us, but we need to ask ourselves, but what are we doing as Africa? So I think we have a solution from within before we start to think about them. Thank you.
All right, fantastic. Colleagues, it's been so great spending the afternoon with you because so much has come out from this room. I'm just going to tell you 3 things The Accountability Collective is huge because now we want young people to center their voices in the accountability process. We invite you to do 3 things. 1, nominate young people to engage in this process. Remember, we all have an assignment. Our emails are very much open, and we're saying up to 5, up to 10, it's up to you. Bring them on board. Let us hear their voices. Let us document their voices. Let us have them at the center of the global stage, talking about all these issues all together. Second is to fund this process. You know, one thing I always tell partners is, whenever you have the opportunity to fund, please do it. Do it with a whole heart. Why? Because there's a cause attached to it. So if you hear us telling you, we need this and that, please try and find a way to collaborate with us in that manner. And third is to offer technical assistance. We've talked a lot about data and evidence. There's a lot of data that's showing up from the civil society space within this frontier. There's research papers, there's reports, there's so much of that. We do not want to reinvent the wheel. We want to use what is already out there and have collective civic action coming from that as well. So I invite you all to collaborate with us, engage with us, and keep this conversation going as much as possible. And Nyawera, I'm going to give you the honor to throw one call to action from this conversation as a key representation of young women. In 30 seconds, and then we can all leave the room.
Thank you. I think one call to action is, I would say girls and young women are political beings. They are political, their bodies are political, their existence is political, and they should be treated as political beings who are bringing something to the table.
Do we agree? The session is closed.